Okay, so you know how some historical figures just kind of grab you and they don't let go? But at the same time, they leave you with this like unsettling feeling, like something's not quite right. I think J. Robert Oppenheimer is like that for me. I mean, the father of the atomic bomb.
Yeah.
It's a title that carries so much weight. It makes you think about the incredible intelligence it must have taken to even think of such a thing. But then you're hit with this really stark reality. This is a weapon that could literally end the world as we know it.
Right. It's that tension, that duality that makes his story so compelling even all these years later. This deep dive isn't just about tracing the events of his life. It's about going deeper.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the why. What motivated this brilliant, complex individual to create something so destructive? And then what were the lasting consequences? Not just for the world, but for Oppenheimer himself.
Exactly. And to get to the heart of that, we've been digging into this incredibly detailed biography of him. It's got everything from his childhood to his education, which even before the bomb is pretty extraordinary, to these major scientific contributions that often get overshadowed.
Yeah.
It covers his surprising foray into politics, his absolutely vital role in the Manhattan Project, and of course, his life after the bomb, living with the weight of what he helped create. Our goal here is to take all that information and really distill it down, kind of pull out the most important, fascinating parts of his story.
I like that, distilling it down. It's like we're trying to extract the essence of Oppenheimer, understand what made him tick. And the way I see it, we can break this journey down into key phases. We'll start by looking at his upbringing, the unusual circumstances that really shaped his mind early on. Then we'll delve into those important early contributions he made to physics, work that, as you said, goes way beyond the atomic bomb. We'll trace his kind of surprising involvement in politics, his leadership during those intense years of the Manhattan Project, and then finally, the complicated aftermath, and how his own thoughts on what he had done evolved over time.
Sounds like a plan. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. Oppenheimer's childhood. He grows up in New York City, a very privileged upbringing. And it sounds like his parents really emphasize education, but maybe that came at a cost, right? Like he didn't have a lot of typical social interaction.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. He later said that his childhood didn't really prepare him for, I guess you could say, the harsh realities of the world. He felt that this lack of normal, everyday interactions actually made it harder for him to become, and I'm quoting him here, saintly and normal.
Interesting.
Yeah, like there was always this sense of him being a bit different, a bit set apart.
And that intellectual curiosity starts showing up really early. I mean, 5 years old, he's fascinated by minerals.
Right.
Not your average 5-year-old. And then, at 11, he writes this letter to the New York Mineralogical Society. It's so advanced they think he's an adult. They invite him to give a lecture. He literally has to stand on a box to be seen over the podium.
It's crazy. I can just picture him, this little kid, surrounded by these serious adults, like talking about minerals. It's like a scene from a movie. It really shows you that his mind was working on a different level, developing at an incredible pace.
But maybe without those regular social interactions, those experiences that kind of shape most kids, right?
Yeah, and that pattern, it seems to continue when he goes to Harvard. I mean, he throws himself into his studies, physics, chemistry, math, obviously, but also literature, English, French, even delves into Indian and Chinese studies, poetry, art. It's like his whole world becomes this intense intellectual pursuit. And that probably contributed to his, his shyness, a kind of social immaturity that stuck with him for a while.
So all that intense focus, well, obviously it fuels his intellect. It seems like there was also this kind of darker side. His friends notice periods of depression, and he even describes this time as infinite adolescence, marked by a pretty harsh self-criticism.
Yeah, he's clearly a very complex individual struggling with things beyond his obvious brilliance, and those struggles become even more apparent when he moves to Cambridge in England.
Right, to study at the Cavendish Laboratory under Ernest Rutherford.
Exactly. This is a huge deal. Rutherford is like a legend in physics.
And you'd think someone who had excelled so effortlessly at Harvard would just continue on that path.
You'd think. But he runs into some unexpected challenges. He's surprisingly clumsy in the lab, and for the first time starts to doubt his own intelligence. Can you imagine? The kid who always grasped scientific concepts with ease, suddenly having to confront the fact that real scientific work requires serious effort, precision, a lot of trial and error.
Has a cautionary tale for child prodigies, right?
Yeah.
Like, early success doesn't always guarantee smooth sailing later on.
Yeah.
And things get pretty rough for him in Cambridge. He considers suicide, and then there's that really disturbing incident in Paris with his friend.
Yeah, that's a really troubling episode. He attacks and tries to strangle a friend. It really points to the level of emotional turmoil he's going through.
It's unsettling.
It is. The psychological help he gets isn't effective. And they misdiagnose him with schizophrenia, which definitely doesn't help. Looking back, it seems more likely that his struggles were linked to, maybe his incredibly active mind, a kind of hypersensitivity, those underdeveloped social skills, rather than an actual severe mental illness like schizophrenia.
Thankfully, things take a turn when he moves to Göttingen, Germany, to study physics under Max Born.
Ah, Göttingen. This is where he really comes into his own.
It sounds like it.
He's surrounded by these incredible minds, future giants of physics. Heisenberg, Jordan, Pauli, Dirac, Fermi, Teller, you name it, they were there.
Wow.
And they're all wrestling with this brand new revolutionary field, quantum physics, where the rules governing the very small are totally different from what we see in the everyday world.
Yeah, I remember trying to wrap my head around that in college.
Right, it's mind-bending stuff. But for Oppenheimer, being immersed in this cutting-edge field, it reignites his confidence. He flourishes, gets his doctorate, and publishes 16 theoretical papers in just 3 years. And that's an insane pace of discovery.
16 papers. That's incredible. So after all that, he decides to come back to the States in 1929. He's only 25, but he's already kind of rock star in the physics world.
Oh, absolutely. And his goal is to build up the field of physics in the U.S. He has offers from top universities, but he ends up choosing Berkeley.
Berkeley. Why Berkeley?
Well, the scientific opportunities, of course. But also, get this, he was really drawn to their collection of 16th and 17th century French poetry.
No way.
Yeah. It really shows you how broad his interests were. He wasn't just this physics machine. He was deeply engaged with art and literature as well.
Fascinating. So, even as a professor, his personality seems to have remained pretty complex.
Yeah.
He gets this reputation for being the most accomplished physicist in the U.S., and he could be incredibly captivating in conversations. But in public, often he came off as aloof, distant.
Right, those are the consistent descriptions we see. Students would take his courses twice just to try to grasp the concepts he was presenting.
Wow.
And even in those documentaries from later in his life, you can still feel that magnetic presence. Hans Bethe, another brilliant physicist, described Oppenheimer as the kind of professor who always knew what the most important problems were, and he would completely engage with them. They would have these long discussions that would jump from the nitty-gritty of quantum electrodynamics to cosmic rays to nuclear physics, all in one afternoon. It's like his mind was constantly making these incredible leaps.
Amazing. It's interesting that before all the focus shifted to the Manhattan Project, his early scientific work was actually groundbreaking. He wasn't just a great teacher, he was making real contributions to the field.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in 1930, at just 26 years old, he writes this paper that basically predicts the existence of positrons. He's looking at Paul Dirac's work on positively charged electrons, and Dirac was really struggling with some of the weird solutions that were coming out of his equations. Oppenheimer's analysis challenges the initial interpretation, which was that these positive electrons were actually protons, and his critique actually pushes Dirac to propose the existence of this entirely new particle, the anti-electron, what we now call the positron.
So he's challenging Dirac, one of the giants of physics?
Exactly, and he's proven right. Just 2 years later, the positron is discovered experimentally. It's a huge confirmation of Oppenheimer's theoretical insights.
Incredible. And then later in the 30s, his focus shifts to astrophysics, right? Influenced by another great physicist, Richard Tolman.
Right, and this leads to some truly fundamental work on neutron stars and even the prediction of black holes.
Black holes. This is way before anyone really understood what those were.
I know, right? It's 1939, and he co-authors this paper with his student, Hartland Snyder, on what they called continued gravitational contraction. Essentially, they lay the theoretical groundwork for our modern understanding of black holes, these regions of space-time, where gravity is so intense, nothing, not even light, can escape.
Mind-blowing stuff.
Stephen Hawking himself later acknowledges the importance of this work. But interestingly enough, Oppenheimer didn't seem to give it as much attention as you might expect. It's like he was always racing ahead, already thinking about the next big problem, the next big idea.
Well, he always had a lot going on in that head of his. We already talked about his love of poetry, his fluency in 6 languages. It paints a picture of a mind that's incredibly broad, insatiably curious.
Right, and that intellectual curiosity extends even into, get this, religion. Particularly Hinduism.
Hinduism.
Yeah.
That's not what you'd expect from a leading physicist.
I know, it's surprising. But his close friend, Isidore Rabi, said that Oppenheimer was drawn to these areas outside of traditional science, like the complexities of Hindu philosophy, as a way of grappling with the ultimate mysteries of the universe. Rabi felt that Oppenheimer saw a deeper level of mystery at the frontiers of physics than was maybe actually there, and he turned towards this more mystical realm of intuition to try to make sense of it all.
And that's where his fascination with the Bhagavad Gita comes in.
Exactly. He discovers it in the early 1930s, and it really has this profound, lasting influence on him. The Bhagavad Gita, which translates to the Song of the Lord, or Divine Song, became a central text for him.
I have to admit, I don't know a lot about it.
Well, it's interesting because its teachings have resonated with figures from all over the ideological spectrum.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, from Gandhi, who was all about nonviolence, to Himmler, the architect of the SS, who reportedly kept a copy with him all the time.
Wow, that's quite a range of interpretations. And Oppenheimer was serious about it, right? He learned Sanskrit just to read it in the original.
That's right, he did. It's hard to measure exactly how much it impacted him, but Oppenheimer himself said it had a radical influence on his worldview. And, you know, as we'll see later, you can maybe find echoes of some of its complex moral principles in his later actions.
So, for those of us who aren't familiar, what's the basic story of the Bhagavad Gita?
Well, it's set on a battlefield. The main character is this warrior prince named Arjuna, and he's facing this huge moral dilemma. He realizes that the opposing army he has to fight includes members of his own family, his teachers, people he respects.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's overwhelmed by doubt and despair and refuses to fight. His charioteer, who is actually the god Krishna in disguise, guides him through this really deep philosophical conversation. Krishna encourages Arjuna to fulfill his sacred duty, his dharma, emphasizing selfless action and devotion as the highest path.
And there's that famous line, right, about becoming death, the destroyer of worlds.
Exactly. Krishna reveals his true divine form, and it's terrifying and awe-inspiring. He's this cosmic being with countless mouths and eyes, representing the totality of the universe and the destructive power of time. And that's when he says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
Which, of course, Oppenheimer famously remembers during the Trinity test. So it really shows you how deeply this ancient text resonated with him.
It really does. But, you know, going back to his intellectual curiosity, his broad range of interest, as amazing as that was, it also maybe worked against him in some ways.
How so?
While it gave him this unique, wide-ranging perspective, it also meant he sometimes lacked focus. He was brilliant, no doubt, but maybe he never quite achieved the level of sustained breakthroughs of someone like Einstein or Born or Schrödinger. He had a tendency to, dive deep into a problem, and then maybe when it wasn't new and challenging enough, move on to the next thing.
I see.
And maybe that's partly why, even though he was nominated 3 times for the Nobel Prize, he never actually won it.
Interesting. So, a brilliant, complex mind, already grappling with these big philosophical questions long before the atomic bomb even enters the picture. But then, the world changes, and his focus shifts dramatically.
It does. And to understand that shift, we have to understand the political landscape of the time.
Okay, let's talk politics. It seems like initially, Oppenheimer wasn't very interested in politics at all.
Not at all. He admitted that he didn't even vote until 1936. He said he didn't really understand much about, the relationship between individuals and society. He didn't own a radio or a telephone, rarely read newspapers. He found out about the stock market crash of 1929 long after it happened. His family's wealth kind of shielded him from the immediate impact of the Depression. So he was a bit detached from those broader social and political issues.
So what changed? What triggered his shift towards, I guess you could say, left-wing politics in 1934?
Well, the rise of fascism in Europe was a big factor, especially the persecution of Jewish scientists in Germany.
Right.
When these prominent physicists were being forced out of their positions, forced to flee, Oppenheimer felt this growing sense of responsibility to help. He started donating a big chunk of his salary, like 3%, to support these scientists and their families.
And it wasn't just financial support, right? He got involved in the 1934 West Coast fishermen's strike with his students. And then there's his relationship with Jean Tatlock.
Yeah, meeting Jean Tatlock in 1936 was a turning point. She was a medical student, and she was very politically active, deeply concerned about world events. She was a member of the Communist Party, and through her, Oppenheimer was exposed to this whole new world of political ideas, social issues.
So he's starting to engage with the world in a way he hadn't before.
Exactly. He even said that he started making left-wing friends, sympathizing with causes that had seemed distant before. He was becoming much more aware of his place in the world, the pressing issues of the time like unemployment, the Spanish Civil War, racial discrimination.
He even said he didn't see communists as a danger at that time, and that some of their goals seemed reasonable to him.
Right. And it's important to remember the historical context.
Yeah.
In the 1930s, communist ideas weren't as universally condemned in the U.S. as they would later become.
Right.
They appealed to a lot of different people for different reasons. Now, Oppenheimer shared some of those progressive ideas, but the FBI, they spent decades trying to prove that he was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party, and they never could.
So not a communist, but maybe a sympathizer.
Exactly, or a fellow traveler, as they called it back then.
And then he marries Kitty Harrison in 1940, who also had communist affiliations.
Yeah, Kitty had a complicated past. She'd been married 3 times before Oppenheimer and was still married to her 3rd husband when they started their relationship. She was a dedicated member of the Communist Party. They had 2 kids together, Peter and Catherine. And over time, both Oppenheimer and Kitty distanced themselves from active political involvement. Oppenheimer later realized just how much control the Soviet Union had over the Communist Party in the U.S. But he always maintained he was never a member himself, just a sympathizer.
But even so, those past associations, his wife's background, his new circle of politically active friends, it all created what the FBI saw as a compromising network. They put him on a watch list.
Yeah, he was basically flagged for potential arrest if there was a national emergency. It gives you a sense of the political climate at the time.
It does. And it sounds like as information came out about Stalin's regime in the USSR, Oppenheimer, like a lot of Americans, became disillusioned with communist ideals.
Yeah, absolutely. The more people learned about the purges, the suppression of dissent in the Soviet Union, even the persecution of anti-fascist physicists who had fled there, that initial idealistic view of communism started to crumble. The reality of the Soviet system was just too harsh to ignore. And all this is happening right as these revolutionary discoveries in physics are taking place, discoveries that would change the world forever, discoveries that would change Oppenheimer's life forever.
Right, discoveries that lead directly to the creation of the atomic bomb.
Exactly. In the late 1930s, German physicists make a major breakthrough. They discover uranium fission.
Fission, that's the splitting of the atom, right?
Yes, and this is made possible by the earlier discovery of the neutron, this subatomic particle with no electric charge. That lack of charge was key, because it allowed the neutron to penetrate the nucleus of an atom, the positively charged core, without being repelled.
Okay.
And when that happens, it triggers a chain reaction, nuclear fission. The nucleus splits, releases huge amounts of energy and more neutrons, which then go on to split other nuclei.
Like a domino effect.
Exactly. Each domino falling releases more energy. And Oppenheimer, like any brilliant scientist, he immediately sees the potential of this. It's like within days of the news breaking, he's sketching the basic concept of an atomic bomb on a blackboard.
Wow. So he goes from theoretical physics to thinking about weapons of mass destruction.
It's a huge leap. But that's how quickly things were moving at that time. Suddenly, there's this incredibly abundant source of energy locked within uranium. It's on a scale beyond anything previously known, far beyond coal or oil.
But the timing of this discovery is just terrible, right? It's 1939, the world is on the brink of war.
It's devastatingly bad timing. What could have been this amazing source of peaceful energy, it's immediately viewed through the lens of war. It changes everything. The relationship between scientists and their governments, it's completely transformed. Scientific research, especially anything to do with nuclear physics, becomes top secret. Scientists essentially become instruments of the state.
So the race to build the bomb begins.
It does. And it's not just Germany. Britain, the United States, France, Japan, the Soviet Union, they're all vying to unlock the secrets of nuclear weapons. The US, they start studying chain reactions seriously, and President Roosevelt sets up the Uranium Advisory Committee to explore the possibilities. But it's the attack on Pearl Harbor that really kicks everything into overdrive.
Right. December 1941. The U.S. enters the war, and all resources are directed towards atomic research.
It becomes this all-consuming effort. They're racing against time, racing against an enemy they believe is pursuing the same terrifying technology.
And that's where the Manhattan Project comes in, and Oppenheimer's crucial role in leading it. It almost sounds like he was destined for this, even if he didn't know it at the time.
In May 1942, James B. Conant, who had been one of Oppenheimer's professors at Harvard, offers him the leadership of a group at Berkeley focused on fast neutron calculations, the kind needed for a bomb. Oppenheimer, with everything that's going on in Europe, he throws himself into this. His official title was Coordinator of Rapid Rupture.
Rapid rupture, kind of a euphemism, right?
Totally. They weren't trying to hide what they were working on. And he quickly organizes a summer program at Berkeley on bomb theory, bringing together his students and those European physicists who'd fled the Nazis. Guys like Edward Teller, who would later become known as the father of the hydrogen bomb.
Right.
And then the military takes over.
Enter the Manhattan Project.
Yeah, June 1942, the Army Corps of Engineers establishes the Manhattan Engineering District, what everyone just calls the Manhattan Project. They bring all the scattered research teams under a unified military command. They bring in British, Canadian, even emigre scientists who fled Hitler.
They realize this is too big, too important to be left to individual universities.
Exactly. They need a dedicated secret laboratory, and they need someone to lead it. That's where General Leslie Groves comes in. And this meeting he has with Oppenheimer, on a train no less, it's a turning point.
Tell me about it.
It's October 1942, and Groves, who's in charge of the whole Manhattan Project, he's interviewing Oppenheimer. And they talk for hours. Groves walks away convinced that Oppenheimer is this brilliant, unique mind. He says he could discuss any topic except sports. And despite concerns about his lack of administrative experience and those lingering questions about his politics, Groves realizes that Oppenheimer has the ambition, the intellectual capacity, the sheer intelligence to lead this unprecedented project.
It must have been a surprising choice for a lot of people. I mean, he hadn't won a Nobel Prize. He hadn't really led a big research team before. And there were those security concerns, right?
Oh, yeah. The security services had reservations, at one point even denying him full access to classified files. But Groves saw something special in Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer himself understood the weight of what he was being asked to do. He said that the project's success could determine the outcome of the war, that it was this incredible opportunity to use science for the benefit of the nation, to secure its place in history.
And for the location of this super secret lab, he suggests Los Alamos, this remote spot in New Mexico. It wasn't just a random choice, was it?
Not at all. He had a personal connection to that area. He loved the Los Alamos Canyon. There was an existing facility there, the Los Alamos Ranch School, which had been used to treat tuberculosis.
Okay.
Oppenheimer famously said that physics and the desert were his two loves. The remoteness of Los Alamos, but its relative accessibility, made it perfect for secrecy, for building the production facilities they needed, for testing. He even thought about the lack of really tall mountains nearby as a plus.
Why?
He thought it would be better for morale. He didn't want the team to feel closed in, trapped. General Groves agreed it was the ideal location.
So April 1943, Oppenheimer, at age 39, officially becomes the director of Los Alamos. It must have been incredibly daunting.
Oh, absolutely. He understood the enormity of what they were doing. He said everyone knew this invention would shock the world, and they were starting to realize how difficult the work would be, the constant tension, the unknown consequences. They had to build everything from scratch, the labs, the roads, housing for all the scientists and their families, and they had to do it fast. I mean, early on, people were literally getting stuck in the mud all the time. It was chaos.
And then, on top of all that, he has to recruit some of the brightest minds in physics from all over the world, convince them to come to this remote location, work under total secrecy.
He called them the luminaries.
It sounds like something out of a comic book.
Right. But these were real people, renowned physicists, leaving their families, their jobs, signing open-ended contracts, all with no guarantee of success. Oppenheimer, he used all his persuasive skills, his charisma, to convince them to come. He had to articulate the mission, the importance of it, and really inspire them to dedicate themselves to this crazy project.
And then there were those initial challenges of trying to figure out how to organize the work, especially the relationship between the scientists and the military, right?
Right. There was this debate early on about whether the scientists should actually be in the military, given the wartime context.
Right.
Oppenheimer even ordered an officer's uniform, took a medical exam, but he was rejected. Too skinny, a bad cough they thought might be tuberculosis, back pain.
Rejected by the Army.
I know. And a lot of the other scientists, they didn't want to be part of the military structure either. So they reached this compromise where the University of California agrees to manage Los Alamos under contract with the Defense Department. It gave the scientists a kind of civilian status, but still under military oversight.
It sounds like a complicated arrangement.
Very. And to make things even more complicated, the project just exploded in size.
Really?
Yeah, Oppenheimer's initial projections for the size and resources, they were way too optimistic. Los Alamos went from a few hundred people in 43 to over 6,000 by the end of the war in 45.
Wow.
Victor Weisskopf, another physicist on the project, he talked about how Oppenheimer was deeply involved in both the theoretical and experimental work, not just managing things. He had this ability to understand any scientific problem, no matter how complex. Weisskopf said Oppenheimer was there for every crucial decision, and he created this atmosphere at Los Alamos. Intense, collaborative, challenging. He wasn't just an administrator, he was a leader, an intellectual force.
And given the nature of the work, secrecy was obviously paramount. It must have been like living in a spy novel.
Secrecy was everything. I mean, even before the Manhattan Project officially started, scientists were already worried about their discoveries being misused. Percy Williams Bridgman, one of Oppenheimer's old lecturers at Harvard, he even wrote an article arguing that scientists from totalitarian states shouldn't be allowed access to his lab.
Really?
Yeah, he was worried about scientific data being used for bad purposes. The ironic thing is, all this worry didn't stop Klaus Fuchs, this German-born British physicist on the Manhattan Project, from leaking information to the Soviet Union.
It's crazy how, even with all those precautions, there were still leaks.
Right, and to try to prevent that, the military administration really tried to compartmentalize information within the lab, keeping different departments isolated.
But that must have created friction.
Oh, it did. Scientists, they thrive on open communication. These restrictions, designed to limit the flow of information, they clashed with the whole scientific process. And the surveillance was intense phone taps, open mail, even microphones in people's homes.
Wow.
And Oppenheimer, as the director, he was under constant scrutiny.
And then there's that security clearance form from 42, where he mentions being a member of communist organizations on the West Coast. That comes back to bite him later.
It does. When the Atomic Energy Commission was considering his security clearance renewal in 53, that statement became a huge problem. He said he didn't remember saying it, that it wasn't true, that if he did say it, it was a joke. But it didn't really help his case. He was under constant observation. His bodyguard, his driver, they were both reporting on him.
That's intense. He must have felt like he was living in a fishbowl.
He did. He tried to evade the surveillance, but it was impossible. And then there's this meeting he has with his ex-fiancée, Jean Tatlock, in 43. The biography calls it a fatal mistake.
Why? What happened?
Well, he explained that Jean had asked to see him one last time before he went to Los Alamos. She was going through a lot in psychiatric treatment, very distressed. Oppenheimer said that while Jean had been a member of the Communist Party, she wasn't a true ideological communist, and that their meeting was harmless.
But the FBI didn't see it that way.
Not at all. They were immediately notified. They thought Tatlock might be passing secrets to the Soviets, even though they had no evidence from their wiretaps.
Wow.
Tragically, Jean died by suicide just 6 months later. General Groves actually got a request to fire Oppenheimer after this meeting, but he refused. He knew how crucial Oppenheimer was to the project. But the suspicions, they never really went away.
It's incredible to think that the head of security at Los Alamos actually suspected Oppenheimer of being a Soviet spy.
It shows you the level of paranoia at the time.
Yeah.
In August 43, Colonel Boris Pash, he interrogates Oppenheimer directly, asking him point blank if he's a member of the Communist Party.
And what did Oppenheimer say?
Well, he offers this theory about a possible spy network within the lab, and he mentions George Eltonton as someone who might be trying to get information for the Soviets.
Okay.
But then, under pressure, Oppenheimer reveals that his friend, Hakan Chevalier, a professor at Berkeley, had approached him.
Approached him about what?
About passing information to the Soviets.
Oh, wow.
Chevalier told Oppenheimer that he'd been contacted by Eltonton, who was complaining about the lack of scientific exchange between the US and USSR. Eltonton had proposed this secret channel for sharing information through Chevalier, who was friends with Oppenheimer.
So he's basically asking Oppenheimer to spy.
Essentially. But Oppenheimer says he refused, flat out.
Okay.
But the damage was done. Even though Oppenheimer was loyal and didn't see Chevalier as a traitor, this disclosure really hurt his reputation and it ended Chevalier's career. It just shows you how dangerous that environment was, how easily even innocent conversations could be misinterpreted.
It's almost suffocating. So much pressure, so much secrecy. And in the midst of all this, Oppenheimer is trying to lead this massive project towards its ultimate goal, the Trinity test.
And by this point, Los Alamos has become this whole town, this self-contained world.
It was much bigger than anyone had anticipated.
Yeah. Roy J. Glauber, another physicist on the project, he later said that Oppenheimer was